There's a big Opportunity Zones event coming up April 9 through 12 in Park City, Utah, focused on the road to OZ 2.0. This conference is shaping up to be one of the most important industry gatherings in years. It's going to bring together leading qualified opportunity funds, investors, family offices, project sponsors, policymakers, and other key players to help set priorities and shape the agenda for the extension and renewal of the OZ incentive, all within the broader context of pending tax legislation and regulatory updates. Stick around as my guest and I dive into event details, current OZ trends, and what the future may hold for Opportunity Zones. Welcome to the Opportunity Zones podcast. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, and joining me on the show today is Jim Lang from Greenberg Traurig, located in Tampa, Florida. Jim, great to see you. How are you?
Great seeing you. Thank you for having me this morning.
Absolutely. As I mentioned in the intro, you have a conference coming up very quickly, just in a couple of weeks here, in beginning of April. But we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But first, just a broad question for you. I want to get a sense from you of how you have viewed the evolution of Opportunity Zones, because you've been involved with Opportunity Zones since the very beginning, since the program's inception in 2017, 2018 is when everything really first started rolling out. How has the legal landscape around Opportunity Zones evolved since program inception, and what changes or trends are you seeing today?
No, it's a great question. Yes, we were involved. We were yelling from a mountaintop on still in 2017 that this is one of the more important tax incentives you have to pay attention to over the last 30, 40 years. And so we've been involved early. We've done 19, close to $20 billion of QOF formation at this point, and have a pretty broad team that work on it. But in those early days, and we know a lot more today too, obviously, we were running for a while there without great guidance and without much of a legal landscape, having to rely on precedents and throw a lot of disclosures in early documents about what could happen and contingencies and how deals were structured. But that was really the Wild West. That's when everybody, 2018 and 2019, I don't feel like you'd go every 40 seconds and you'd see a new shingle hung up for QOZs. Somebody else was opening a fund or doing a project or had some new idea in the industry. Since then, what we've seen is a lot of stabilization. We've seen the players that made it, and we've seen coalescing around that, and we've seen a lot of the big funds or the sponsors that know what they're doing in this industry really go well, and they've got their hold on what they're doing and are doing well in the industry. And then we've seen a lot of people drop out of the QOF world too. But I think when we got some certainty around, say, 90% of what we needed to know, 85 to 90% of what we needed to know to get things going, that's when we started really solidifying the industry. And then things really took off 2021 when there were all the capital gains in the markets and we had good answers.
Yeah, that was very helpful when those two things coincided around that time, 2019, 2020. A lot of capital gains in the market before the dip from COVID, and
right.
and then finally had some final regs to put to work there. But one thing you said that I found really interesting, I want to pick your brain on a little bit more, is you've structured close to $20 billion in investments at your firm. That's a huge number. So I just want to refer to our friends at Novogradac, who I think in their most recent update had estimated about $40 billion, or they're not estimating. They have tracked about $40 billion of capital that has flowed into different QOFs all around the country. Now, they admit that they're only capturing maybe a quarter to a third of the total marketplace. So, I always extrapolate from their numbers. I 4X it. So I say, I think we're probably at about $160 billion in equity raised from QOFs through year end 2024. Do you think that's a fair estimate, or are we underestimating things, or just based on where you sit, what do you think?
I mean, it's reading tea leaves, but obviously we see a lot of the market. And our friends at Novogradac know. I think they do the best job of tracking it. There's just not much to track, and they know that they're taking the data that they have available, and they're putting out fantastic estimates. And really, I think they're putting out conservative estimates because that's what you have to do when you're working with limited data. Having said that, though, they are missing a lot of what's actually happening out there because private family offices and high net worths are not reporting. They're not reporting to them, and they're not reporting really to anybody except on their tax returns. And we have a lot of the big entities, the big qualified opportunity fund LP allocators, who are not reporting to them and only really reporting on their tax returns. And so we're not seeing a lot of those big numbers get reflected. So, for example, if you have a Silicon Valley family office that puts in somewhere between $1 to $5 billion into QOF transactions that they might be doing, that they might be privately funding, whether it's real estate or their own operating ventures, you're not seeing that show up. And so that's a lot of capital that's coming through family office networks and family offices that we're just not seeing what that scope is. My estimate that I've told before, and I have no idea the accuracy of this, but it's my feel just on the heartbeat of the industry is that we're probably 250 billion plus of investment, and a lot of that is private investment.
Wow, that is the biggest estimate that I've heard. I think the Trump administration in the first administration came out with their, well, I think one of their first reports, if I recall correctly, I might be misremembering some of the details, but the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council came out with an estimate of $75 billion pretty early in the program. I thought, man, that sounds way too high, but I don't know, maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I think you're right. If you know, two or three large single family offices could really swing the numbers one way or another. And like you mentioned, it is reading the tea leaves and it is an impossible exercise because there really isn't a lot of data. And yeah, thank you to our friends at Novogradac for doing the great work they do tracking this. But yeah, that is a very big number, Jim. If we've had $250 billion pour into this program already, it's definitely up there in the triple digit $billion right now. But where exactly it is, if it's 100 or 200 or 250, it's anybody's best guess, I think. But suffice it to say, it's a very large program, much larger than any other economic development program of its kind. So we talked a little bit about how OZs have evolved from those Wild West days in 2018, and now the marketplace has matured quite a bit. Where we are coming up to the sunset date, though, unless opportunity zones get extended. I'll pick your brain on that in a moment. But first, what do you see unfolding with regards to future policy? We have a lot of potential changes coming to the OZ program as soon as this year, if opportunity zone legislation goes into effect. Are you advising your clients, or what should fund managers and investors really be doing now to prepare for any potential shifts or changes to the opportunity zones program?
Well, I mean, part of that is get together with the industry and make sure everyone's on the same page and talking off the same book here that I think the priorities are the same priorities among any groups you're going to talk to in the QOZ space, particularly on the private side, but making sure that those are heard and they're heard by the policymakers going forward. But how do we plan for that? You can't until we know what's in the bill. We know what priorities we've got. We've worked on a lot of different letters that have gone into leaders to Congress, and to all the policymakers. So we know what we want generally, and we keep a running 4 page just bullet point track of the things that we would like, both regulatory and legislatively. But we can't plan for that until it's actually law. And so we can try and get our clients ready for what's around the turns, get their docs ready for what QOZ 2.0 could look like, and very well will take some shades in. But for example, launching a new fund, a great question is, when should we launch it? We don't know until we know what the legislation is going to look like, and we know with certainty what it's going to look like. But that's tricky if you're a new fund manager, because you want to get out early enough where and capture the new legislation, but you don't want to be before it. You don't want to be on the tide right before it. So it's a tricky question as to when should you launch your next fund, your next vintage, or if you're starting your first fund, when that should launch. But in terms of preparing for 2026, at this point, you got to prepare as if the law is the law today, and that your investors have a tax bill coming up in 2026, and there's that's why I believe legislatively we crossed the river a long time ago. in terms of development projects, particularly in real estate. They'd planned for a long time to take stabilization refinance proceeds to pay taxes at that point. So development essentially complete. So we've had a little bit of chilling effect in the industry, and that we can't at this point develop new projects and have them refinanced by 2026. So investors either have to dip into their own pocket, or they have to work with something. We've worked with some banks to try and put products together, but margin type of products for QOFs so that they can take loans against their QOF interest. Now that's harder in a private fund than it is if the QOF's publicly traded, but there's very few either publicly traded or REIT type of QOFs out there that and so we have to work with what we have, and so it's either dipping into the pocket or it is taking a margin product against your 2026 tax liability if you're going to have a 2026 tax liability. Hopefully that gets pushed out a little bit.
Yeah, hopefully that does get pushed out a little bit. Hopefully that gets pushed to 2028 is one date that's floating around. A lot of potential changes on the horizon, and that brings us to why you're hosting this upcoming Opportunity Zones event, the Yellow Brick Road to QOZ 2.0, taking place at the Montage Deer Valley next to Park City, Utah, April 9th through 12th of this year, 2025. Jim, can you give us an overview of that event, what it is exactly, what it's about, and who is it designed for?
No, absolutely. I'll start with the last question. It's really designed for the whole industry, for all the stakeholders to get together. The stakeholders in the industry to come together, make sure that our priorities and our agenda are what on the same page going into QOZ 2.0, because we're on the verge of it right now. We're obviously there's legislation already being written, and we have a budget through the House, and this reconciliation tax legislation, our one big beautiful bill, will happen at some point this year, and could happen very quickly this year. Could happen still first half or early second half of the year, and so what's going to be in that bill is important for the private industry to weigh in right now. So where this came from, we have an organization that's actually putting it on, American Association of Opportunity Zones, in conjunction with a lot of other private entities. We were asked to put this on from a number of clients and stakeholders in the industry to put everybody together to make sure that everybody's in the same room talking, and that people know what to do. So a lot of these groups have resources, and they know policymakers, and they've got messaging they'd like to put out there, but they want to make sure that they're putting the right messaging out there, and that we're all singing from the same hymnal as we do it, and that they're directing their resources in the right way. So I think it's important just for everybody to talk about what we want to see in QOZ 2.0, and that's the impetus as to the timing. Obviously, anytime you have an event like this, also networking is involved. Now that's not critical as to this potential timing. That's just any of these events or industry events should include networking among the industry, but it's about putting capital with projects, and it's about putting investors with putting the investors with the QOFs that are out there raising money or will be raising money soon. It's about putting the stakeholders with the policymakers in the same room, and having those side meetings, which are so important.
Yeah, I think if you're an investor, family office, and you're looking for deal flow, this event will be great to see what kind of products are out there. If you're a fund manager or developer, it's great to be able to network with some of those types of investors and just with other industry professionals as well. If you're an accountant or an attorney or some other service provider, great way to network together and to talk about best practices and how we're driving policy forward. So as you mentioned, yeah, this is really designed for all industry stakeholders. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and the other members of the industry there in Deer Valley in just a couple of weeks' time here. What kind of speakers or panels or topics do you have slated? Which ones are you most excited about? And a little bit more on why this event and what makes it so special.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very excited about the speakers we have right now. We have top end panelists across a whole series of different topics. With, of course, this is a forward looking conference. This is not talking about QOZ 101. There's plenty of places to learn that. That's not here. Although if you want to, somebody will pull you aside and teach you QOZ 101, but that's not the purpose. And the purpose isn't backward looking. The purpose is looking forward and what is coming, what's around the next bend, and how can we help shape that. But the panelists, the probably the top name panelists I can't announce today, but hopefully that will be up on both the events website and on your website very soon.
Well, besides you and me, because we're both speaking
Well,
at the event, right?
you speak for yourself, you. But but no, the panelists that we do have are incredibly exciting. They're from the biggest QOF, some of the biggest QOFs in the industry, both the LP allocators and the co-GP funds. Also some of the specialty qualified opportunity funds. We have family offices and high net worths, so family office networks and leadership organizations among, say, high net worths. So groups like YPO and many of the family office organizations or networks. Operating businesses, we have a good number of operating businesses that will be there, and sometime in some targeted industries that we don't always talk about, but are going to be very important in 2.0. Obviously, we'll have the professionals there. We'll have lawyers and accountants who have been critical in this space for since the inception, and the folks that have actually stuck around in the QOZ world. But in terms of some of the panels that we're excited about, obviously legislative setting panels and workshopping on legislation and policy and regulation. But we've got sports and entertainment. So we've actually seen a lot of QOZ in the sports world, and we've got some exciting speakers from major sports leagues in the country coming and speaking on those panels, as well as entertainers that are recognizable names, founders of major records in the industry who are now in the qualified opportunity zone world. We've got hospitality targeted. We've got targeted industries for defense, maritime speaking, industrial, onshoring of manufacturing, with the impact on QOZ 2.0 on rural and agricultural type projects or logistics, that ties in somewhat with industrial, but agriculture and rural is going to be very important in 2.0. Student housing and the student housing industry in QOZ. And then we've had a lot of input and help from groups like yours, of course, OZ Insiders, and hopefully many of your insiders can make it, and would love to have them there. There are still speaking spots available. I'd say we're about 38 speakers right now, and we're capping it at around 50 to 55, depending on if we add a panel. But we still have some spots for speakers too. So if we have folks that are interested in speaking, certainly reach out. But been working with the Opportunity Funds Association, Shay Hawkins, and he's been very instrumental in putting many of our great speakers and folks together. Been working with AFPI, America First Policy Institute. Of course, the Novogradac Working Group will be represented, and they've got some of their thought leaders at Nova will be in attendance. Baker Tilly, I believe, I don't know if they've confirmed yet, KPMG and some of the other accounting firms should be in the room and speaking as well. And so we've got industry leaders, folks that are putting out policy. We've got representatives from the working group at Real Estate Roundtable, who of course push policy on the real estate side and make many of the great helpful recommendations to our elected leaders on what we should be doing on the real estate side. And we're going to have those same type of voices on the operating business venture side.
Awesome. It's an incredible panel of speakers that you've assembled. And I know you've got one or two pretty big name keynote speakers, household name keynote speakers that you aren't quite ready to announce just yet. You're trying to firm those up. I'm going to have an updated list of all of the speakers, including those keynotes when they get confirmed, available on my website at opportunityzones.com/podcast. Just click this Jim Lang interview, and I'll have the full speaker list that I have that Jim has provided me there, updated down to the minute if you want to take a look at who's going to be there speaking at this event. And if you can also learn more about this event and register by heading to the website ybr2qoz.com. Did I get that right, Jim?
You're right. You're right. Yes.
Yellow Brick Road to QOZ 2.0. So, and I'll repeat that URL a little bit later in the show. But in the meantime, opportunityzones.com/podcast. to get the link to the registration website for this conference and the updated speaker list. Jim, I want to
Well,
shift. Go
but
ahead.
also just to jump in there, we
Hmm.
obviously the conference organizers have negotiated discounted rates. It's at the Montage in Deer Valley. If weather holds, anybody that does ski, it will be edge season for skiing. So the mountain is supposed to still be open. And there's two reasons that usually you would not have a conference run over a Friday night. And two reasons for that is one, any families that are it's family friendly and any families that are staying to ski specifically over the weekend, but also Friday night or Friday afternoon, Congress lets out of session, I believe, under current schedule on Thursday. So anybody from Congress, either electeds or their senior staffers, we would have to be there Friday. So that's another reason why we have a Friday night. Usually you would not have a conference go over a Friday night, but wanted to highlight that it is family friendly. There's group discount rate at the Montage available upon registration, and looking forward to have some of your insiders join.
Yeah, I'm looking forward too. I know, well, a few OZ insiders that are confirmed to be there. I know Connie Rathbone from VF Law will be speaking. She's an OZ insider. Looks like Jill Homan is on the speaking list, member of AFPI, and also an OZ insider. And of course, Shay Hawkins is one of my first OZ insiders members. So always great to meet up with Shay at the event. And yeah, I just sent an email out to my OZ insiders list just yesterday afternoon. So we're starting to get a little bit of interest in this, and I'll continue to push this out. And hopefully, we'll get a pretty good group together for dinner, maybe that Thursday night on April 10th for OZ Insiders members. Jim, let's shift gears now. I want to talk a little bit more about OZs with you before we wrap up. Curious about, given that your firm has helped put together close to $20 billion worth of OZ deals since program inception, I'm sure you've seen everything basically. I'm sure you've seen a lot of different structures. What are some of the more creative approaches or lesser known aspects of the OZ statute that you've seen some fund sponsors or developers take advantage of?
Oh, that's great. I'm always surprised. We always see something new, but like to say we've seen about everything. What I've seen more in the last year, 2 years, probably 2 years than I've was seeing early on is we're seeing a lot more of the quote unquote pre-TCO deals or the pre-placed in service deals happening. And there's reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is that it takes a lot of risk off the table. You take a lot of development risk off the table. You start cash flowing much earlier in projects. So we're seeing more of that. We're also seeing a lot more preferred equity deals. So we've seen a lot of the larger qualified opportunity funds are now making preferred equity deals into a lot of their joint ventures and QOZBs. Um, and then upstream, but obviously legislation can help, but both upstream and downstream, we have to get creative in many of the transactions in how they're structured because we're really left to two taxable layers here. And because of those two taxable layers, we have to be very creative. It's not how you would normally structure a co-invest deal or how you normally structure a JV in a real estate deal in many cases. And so we have to work around restrictions and make sometimes square peg fit in a round hole in many deals. And we're also seeing an uptick in operating businesses. So operating businesses obviously lagged here in to real estate. Real estate took this over very quickly, and we've seen an uptick in operating businesses use this, particularly startups, healthcare, tech-based businesses that are now headquartering in qualified opportunity zones.
What about a particularly complex OZ deal or unique OZ deal that you help structure? Can you walk us through maybe one or two case studies and what lessons can investors or sponsors take away from that case study?
No, I mean, I can't specifically talk about the deal, but I can talk about the things around it. I'd say I'd say some that are particularly difficult is when you layer in other tax incentives into the deal as well, whether that's low income housing tax credits, new markets tax credits, state tax credits in many cases. So let's say brownfield tax credits in several states or districts. When you layer those in as well, you're creating a much more complex structure. You're also creating a complex structure if you have investors that are interested in different aspects of a project, but we can only have one QOZB, and how we have to structure a deal to make that work. and have certain investors only exposed to certain parts of a overall project. Um, that's been a difficult structuring exercise. Also, when we have mergers, so if we either merge at the QOZB level or we merge up at the Qualified Opportunity Fund level, those have been difficult in many cases. Another that while this isn't as complex, something that is difficult whenever we run into it is obviously dead deals. And we see lots of dead deals. And how do you pull the money out? And how do you make sure you're still either in compliance or safe with your working capital safe harbor plan? Um, I don't know if that's what you are looking for here, but those are some examples of complexities we see all over this that I think we can get some regulation and we can get maybe even some legislation that can fix some holes that make deals easier to do. But right now we have to work with what we have, and I think we've done a good job of doing that and making deals work, even if they're difficult on their face.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I have been in the OZ industry for a very long time now, several years going back to the beginning. But part of what's really interesting about the OZ space is that it is still relatively new, despite the fact that the sunset date, barring legislative extension, is quickly approaching. We're less than 2 years away from the sunset date of December 31, 2026, that deferral date that pretty much would end the program without further extension. But it still is relatively new, and we do still have a lot of people entering the opportunity zone space for the first time. It seems like, not a week goes by where I don't get an email from a relative beginner who wants to know, hey, how does this all work? They've just found out about it, or I get an email from somebody who says, hey, I'm about to buy this property in Oklahoma, and I just found out it's in an opportunity zone. I don't know anything about opportunity zones. It's amazing just how many people still don't know about the program and how many professionals still don't know about the program. What advice do you give new sponsors that are entering the opportunity zone space for the first time, especially in terms of getting everything set up from a legal perspective?
No, absolutely. And that's important is you talk to make sure you got the right professional team. That's the accountants and those are the lawyers that are going to, and if you've got consultants, QOZ consultants, that as well. One of the lagging and something that I know you help folks with to some degree is we've got lagging in terms of putting capital with projects.
Mhm.
We don't have a well-defined brokerage system in the QOZ space, and many local brokers don't have enough depth of knowledge in the space to put them together. And so I think that there is a hole there. But legal and accounting, there are some fantastic accounting firms and obviously legal practitioners around the country doing this work. And it's a pretty small group, but the ones that do it know it very well. I would advise make sure that you're doing that on the front end before you do anything, before you buy the piece of property, before you start the business, before you do your first set of docs. Make sure you're talking with folks that actually know what they're doing in the industry. And one reason for that is we've seen a lot of sponsors who didn't do that on the front end. And I like to say that we're like a car manufacturer. When we throw out the good new qualified opportunity funds, or we help a business become a QOZB, either in development or operating, that we're putting out a beautiful vehicle off the line, and it works and it's good. Unfortunately, we've become a little bit more of a repair shop in some years, where we're getting repairs from sponsors who didn't use counsel that were well versed in QOZs, or they didn't work with accountants that knew QOZ very well, and we've had to do the repair work on a lot of those and change out the engines and the bodies on a lot of those QOZs. And most of them can be saved. It's rare that we find one that can't be saved, but it adds a lot of complexity and heartburn on the back end.
Yeah, and probably a lot of billable hours also for that
It's
client
about
who
it's much
who
it's much more expensive to fix than it
yeah,
is to build it right the first time.
exactly. Yeah. What's the expression? An ounce of cure is, well, no, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, or something to that effect. So yeah, I think the
Right.
moral of the story is make sure you get it set up right to begin with. Work with the right teams and of professional attorneys and accountants before you make the wrong mistakes. Jim, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks in
No,
Utah.
very much looking forward to seeing you and all of our friends across the industry.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. Where should our audience go if they're interested in learning more about your firm, Greenberg Traurig, or the upcoming Opportunity Zone event in Deer Valley?
No, absolutely. So obviously gtlaw.com is to learn more about our firm. Is we're a full service global firm, and to learn about my practice, I'm on the website. That's an easy search on the website, or emailing me at langjim, LANGJIM at gtlaw.com. Easy way to get in touch with me. Obviously, we've talked about the conference. Conference website is www.ybr2qoz.com. And that's where you go to get registered, see the agenda. Speakers should be up there hopefully very soon. We're looking to make sure that we can at least have one keynote announced very soon and get that up on the website. But the agenda is up there. Sponsorship opportunities are there, registration. And then once you register, the event organizers will get in touch with the link to the discounted hotel.
Awesome, Jim. Yeah, the name of the event is the Yellow Brick Road to QOZ 2.0. Looking over my screen right now. That URL, just to confirm, is www.ybr and then the number 2 QOZ.com. YBR2QOZ.com. You can also visit my website, opportunityzones.com/podcast. I'll have links to the registration page for the event, and also I'll have the updated speakers list on there as well. Listeners and viewers out there, if you enjoyed today's show, click that thumbs up button. And for more on today's show, again, please visit our website, opportunityzones.com/podcast. And please be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform to always get the latest episodes from us here at opportunityzones.com. Jim, thanks again. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Looking forward
Sounds
to seeing you
great.
in a couple weeks.
Thank you.